Hello, very beautiful community. This is a tower of smoke billowing up into the sky. And if we press play, you'll see this is a camera angle from a few hours ago in the city center of St. Petersburg. You can see the city revealed to you as the camera pans left. And the apocalyptic scene is there because overnight Ukraine bombed a Wildberries facility in Shushari on the edge of the city, and another facility in Utkinazavet also on the edge of the city that's partly a Wildberries facility. Many other impacts across the country, including a Wildberries facility in Crimea. And to any outsider looking at this, it might seem that the Kremlin's just losing control. There are the apocalyptic scenes across the country. Their special military operation is not a special military operation anymore, because what used to happen on Ukrainian territory is now happening on Russian territory, and they've got a war on their hands. And it doesn't look like the Kremlin can do anything in response. And it doesn't even look like they can say anything in response, because the regime and Mr. Putin have been completely silent about what's been happening over the last few days. So is this outsider perspective reasonable? And how does it square with what's actually happening in Putin's head and what is actually going on in the regime? I want to do this kind of extractive, empathetic experiment with you today. We'll try to put ourselves into Putin's head over the last few days, and then we'll try to look inside what's happening in the regime right now. This is Mr. Putin today in Irkutsk, visiting a military aviation factory. He had a Security Council meeting yesterday, but there was no public transcript and there's no mention about what's happening all over Russia. And again, there he is, signing his name and not saying a squeak to his citizens, to his population, about what the hell is going on and how he wants them to adapt to it and react. So let's jump inside Putin's head. What I think we need to say before doing that is that inevitably some of the stuff in his head is going to be so weird that it feels a bit alien and eerie. And that's because of how distorted his mind is by so many years of unchecked and informalized power. So that's to say that Putin is not going to have psychotic, structured thoughts which require you to break down reality in order to cope with it, to call up down and down up. Putin is not going to experience that in his everyday life. It's not going to be part of his imminent relation to what's on the table. He'll know that's a bottle of water. He'll know that's a telephone. He'll know when to have breakfast. He'll know when to go to bed. So he can do that. But when it comes to elements of his evaluative or interpretive views about the world, then eeriness does come in. And when you get into Putin's head, it begins to feel scary because there is a level of certainty and conviction about certain pictures of the world that just strike you as being not part of reality, and it's just scary and weird. And that scary and weird is a version of normal for anybody in that kind of power, right? Your politicians, after serving a term or two in a democratic system and then getting kicked out, go a bit loopy. So times that by 1,000 when you think about Mr. Putin. Having said this, I do think it is fairly clear how Putin is thinking about this situation. So let's try to jump into his head. What he's essentially thinking is that Ukraine is trying to destabilize him politically by doing these attacks that are going to put pressure on the Russian economy, that are then going to destabilize Russian politics and destabilize Putin's power. That's what Ukraine's trying to do. He doesn't think they can succeed, but he thinks that's what they're trying. He also understands that they understand that they're doing it at a time when Putin can't pull his most accessible escalation lever, which is mobilization. Why can't he pull that? Because he's got an election in September. And you might say, well, what's that got to do with the price of eggs? He's a bloody tyrant and he doesn't need elections. And the answer is yes, he does. Indeed, his perceived legitimacy is profoundly dependent on the relegitimation ritual that elections offer him. And that's a very basic thing to understand about how a monarchist regime like Putin works. So an election is an opportunity for the regime to tell itself that the people are with it, whether they are or they're not, to tell the people that the people are with it, whether they are or they're not, and to tell any opponents inside or outside the country that people are with the regime. So this is important. And if you took elections away, the regime could not survive in its present form. Right? So elections are not democratic, but essential to the regime. And what Putin needs is a relatively peaceable election where no turbulence occurs. Right? If he gets that, then he'll be in a stronger position to take drastic action. And we'll leave for another occasion the conversation whether he will or won't do a mobilization around October time. But he can't do it now. He theoretically can, but it would be too politically destabilizing. Not just because he needs to get through the election first, but also for logistical reasons, such as the fact that it's going to be tricky for the regime to do two things at the same time. And some of the people who need to do these things would not be able to do both at the same time. Some of the same people would need to be involved in both processes. So it's just not a realistic political option until October for Putin. And he knows that the Ukrainians know that, and he thinks, these bastards are getting me because they know that I'm in this tricky period. But he also knows this period will be over. And he also is looking forward to his winter campaign against Ukraine. And that's a very psychological, a very political campaign, an attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure that Putin hopes will lead to political crisis. We did a video about that a couple of months ago on the main channel. I sort of analyzed what he wants Ukrainians to think when he does this. So he's looking forward to being out of this zone, but he knows this is a tricky zone for him and that Ukraine's trying to take advantage of it. There's then a further consequence to this. And that's that Putin thinks that overreacting to what's happening is a way of playing into Ukraine's hands. That's why he doesn't want to go on about what a problem he's got on his hands. That's why he's staying away from the media. And that's why in private, he's also going to be a bit pissed when people come to him and say, oh, look, we've got a problem, we've got a fuel distribution crisis, oh, we've got a problem with this, we've got a problem with that. And he'll say, yes, okay, but also understand when you're going on about all of this, you risk playing into Ukraine's hands by exaggerating or dramatizing the challenges that they're creating for us. So you minimize Ukraine's chances of destabilizing you, right, by playing down what's happening in this tricky season in which you don't have many moves available to you. That's roughly where Putin is at. The reason he is not panicking about getting through this difficult period is that he has quite teleological views about where the whole story is heading. He's anticipating political crisis in Ukraine and a collapse of democracy in the West over the years to come. So he thinks, well, that's going to work in my favor eventually, because in the end, the Ukrainian government is unnatural. It's not quite an appropriate government for that country. It's too much under the influence of various sort of bogus Western projections of power into bits of the world where they don't belong and blah, blah, blah. And once things settle down historically, we won't have quite such nasty governments in Ukraine that are so mean to us. And he thinks the same about NATO's presence in Eastern Europe. It's been there for a couple of decades and more, but it's not natural. An unnatural shit eventually collapses. And I'm here for the long term, and I actually intend to be as close to immortal as I can possibly get. So there's a lot to look forward to. right? And moreover, Putin has faith in Mr. Gerasimov. Putin has faith that Mr. Gerasimov can still get him sufficient results and sufficient progress at the front. You might think, well, that's not very realistic, but Putin thinks that they can keep on making slow progress, and eventually they can get, territorial progress that's a bit more meaningful. So he has a kind of faith in Gerasimov that's also calming for Putin. So funnily enough, amidst all of this, if you said to Putin, is this going really well, really badly, just badly, just well, or something in the middle, what would you say? He would say, not very well, but more like well than in the middle. Fairly well, with some glitches. And here we're a little bit back to that kind of sense of this eerie and a slightly psychotic view of the world. Because Mr. Putin, you're essentially devastating the middle to long range future of your country. But no, it's going well. It's going fairly well for him, and these are glitches. And so that's why I did that proviso, because this is weird stuff. But as somebody who's been reflecting on Putin's historical status, his intent for decades, I started thinking about Putin in the 90s. This is what is happening now. And it's weird for you to hear that, but it's the truth. Now, what the hell is going on in his regime? This is the second thing we should discuss. And something weird is going on inside his regime over the last weeks. Namely, that people are talking more openly about things going badly and there being a need to end the war. These sorts of ideas have been associated with Mr. Kirienko's office. These ideas are uttered by folks in the economic bloc. So again, a reasonable outsider might say, well, this is the regime beginning to implode a little bit because they seem to be criticizing each other and there is conflict. And the answer, as Mark Galliotti pointed out recently, is that that's too optimistic. What's happening is not that people are quarreling and Putin is hiding. It's closer to Putin telling people dance, and they're dancing with the different perspectives they have. So this is permitted debate with a blessing from the top. And this is very typical for the Putin regime. Putin loves positioning himself in the role of a referee. One of the things that was troublesome for him, and is sort of a top 10 cause of the war, is that he felt he was losing power as a referee, that he was outsourcing unconstitutionally and possibly criminally presidential powers to different bits of the regime. Then these different bits of the regime would conflict, and Putin would come in and either arbitrate the conflict or approve of the outcome the conflict generated naturally. And his power in that activity felt to him to be diminished, and he wanted to grab it back for himself. Now, of course, a reasonable political observer would say, well, he's grabbed it back, but his hold over it is more vulnerable than it was before. Right? So this is a very natural way for him to operate. We saw the way this can go wrong at wartime with the Prigozhin mutiny, right? Because this was, again, Putin outsourcing power to different bits of his regime conflicting, Mr. Prigozhin engaging in a conflict with Mr. Shoigu and Gerasimov. And where is Gerasimov? And that got out of hand for Putin to the point that he had to eliminate Mr. Prigozhin. And very briefly, would have faced the risk of being eliminated by Mr. Prigozhin if Mr. Prigozhin actually had a plan for the future of the country rather than just a critique of the incompetence of power. So that's natural for Putin. He's doing a bit of this with the situation in the information environment in the regime. He wants different factions to ventilate different perspectives That's a way of letting off steam. And then over time, having taken his time, because he can't act in any kind of dramatic way right now, Mr. Putin then would come in and sort of tendentiously side with one of the sides in the argument. So this is not conflict, this is vertically sanctioned exercise in the informational environment. Now, do we want to say just a sentence about people very, very low down in the regime and maybe the population? Let's keep it to just a sentence or two on each. Folks low down in the regime are going to be demotivated. They're not going to have a clear understanding of why so much of the country is on fire. And they're not going to have an understanding of why you're not allowed to make a big deal out of it. And they're going to be demotivated, and they're going to be prone to low-level sabotage. The population has not been dramatically transformed out of the standard buckets into which we put it, a big depoliticized blob in the middle that outsources power to Putin but does not substantively support or oppose his particular policies, right? I'm doing a war, okay, great. I'm not doing a war, okay, great, right? I'm bombing Ukraine today, I'm actually going to bomb Russia tomorrow, okay, great, as long as it's not me that's being bombed by this government that happens to have power on the territory which I live. Colonial relationship with the Russian government, Russian people have. Now, it's going to be that depoliticized blob. Then there's going to be a very small number of people, under 20%, but probably closer to 10, who substantively support the war. It's going to be an equally small number of people who substantively oppose the war, maybe even slightly smaller than the people who support it. And everybody else is going to be in the middle. If we see any kind of change, it's probably twofold. The two outer minority bits might be consolidated in their view by the extent of devastation Ukraine's causing on Russian territory. So pro-war people are going to get more pro-war, and anti-war people are going to get more anti-war. And then the second change, I've gone on too long, so this is really the last thing I'm going to say, is that there is going to be a generalized rally around the flag effect, but I think it's going to be very, very, very minor. It's going to be palpable, but it's going to be minor, to the point it doesn't really change anything significantly. But this is just the tendentious sort of universal of human psychology. When stuff falls on your head, even though you caused it, you still are going to feel pissed about it, and going to feel pissed about whoever's doing it to you. But I anticipate that effect being very minor indeed. Lots of love and talk very soon.